And now we have the Swedish Shipowners Association and the Danish shipping here. And we have Ann Steffenson over there, Director and General CEO for Danish Shipping, and the Executive Vice President for the Swedish Shipowners Association, Pia Berglund. An applause, please. So, to start, how has the day been to you both?
It's just always wonderful to come to Dunse, and I think what struck me most is maybe not just us coming to the island, it's maybe basically the people living on the island who contribute, all of them, and it always struck me this is a very special island, even for Swedish measures, that they come together and they live their shipping. It's not just a thing you do 8 to 5, you actually do live it all year round.
Special island in good terms?
Good terms.
Yes. And Anne?
Well, I have to say that this is not my first time at Dunse, but it's my first time at Dunse Shipping Meet. And when Dick Hägglund and Jonas Backman told me that you have to be there, and I thought, you know, how big can it be? And I just have to say that I'm a little overwhelmed how big it actually is, and I'm really impressed that you have been able to get this together in Dunse. So this is definitely not my last time, so congratulations. I really enjoyed it so far.
Thank you so much. We're really glad having you here, both of you. The title is Enforcement of Global CAP 2020, Possibilities and Challenges. What can we learn from experiences of enforcement in SECAS? So why don't we go right on the spot? A global CAP will be introduced by 2020. So what are your views on that?
Thank you. And since there are lots of shipping nerds here, I guess that most of you know what that means, but there will be introduced a global rule in shipping that anywhere you are in the world, from 2020, you will have to have maximum 0.5 sulfur level in your fuels. And this is a big issue for us coming up, of course, because my members of the Swedish Shipowners and the Danish, we work on a global arena, so we have our ships all over the world. And for the Swedish Shipowners, we have had a zero vision for a long time, that we are trying to aim to have as little effect as possible to the sea and in the air as possible. Having said that, it needs to be global and it needs not to affect competition negatively. But in general, we are of course positive to any legislation coming out of IMO and that are global and equal to us.
What do you say, Anne?
Well, I think that the sulfur cap in 2020 is both an opportunity and also a challenge for us. An opportunity because we can definitely show the world that we are reducing our negative impact on the environment, and a challenge because we need to make sure that we are not only going to have a IMO regulation in place, we also need to have an effective implementation and not least an effective enforcement of this new regulation, so that we know that on the other side of 2020 we will have a global playing field. This is utmost importance for us as a shipping industry to make sure that we get the enforcement and the implementation right. And I think this is the big challenge and the big topic to discuss on the sulfur cap.
Mm-hmm. There are many positive effects, but is there anything that might be a problem or any concerns around this?
I think what we have been discussing up till actually this year is whether we will have the fuel available at all. Will there be enough low sulfur fuel available on a global level by 2020? And I think IMO said it's last thing this year. Yes, we decide that we do think that it will be available. And as ship owners, of course, we adapt to legislation. That's what you do as a living. And now, as Anne is saying, okay, we hear you out loud, it will be there, so we have to adapt to that. But will the governments be ready? These will be ships out of the open sea, out on the ocean sailing. How will you make sure from the governments that you will actually be able to enforce this when we have seen it's not being done in a very coastal near environment? So that's sort of the concern we do share, and that's why we want to address it.
I completely agree, and I think that one of the lessons learned from when we implemented the 0.1% sulfur fuel in the SECA area, one of the lessons learned is that we need to make sure that we push this agenda in order to make sure that not only are ship owners ready for the sulfur cap in 2020, the governments and the authorities also have to be ready. And I think that we need to be more dramatic in a way in the measures that we need to put in place for 2020. One of the things that we have been looking at in Danish shipping is, should we go for a complete ban on non-compliant fuel, unless you have, of course, scrubber technology on board your ships, or you are running them on LNG, as, thank God, a lot of the ship owners in Donsø are. But are we going to have a complete ban on non-compliant fuel on board ships with no scrubbers or LNG? Is one of the things that we're looking at in terms of enforcement. So I think we have to push the agenda, and I think that one of the areas where we work together in a lot of areas in Danish shipping and Swedish shipping, but one of the areas where we can work together also going forward is to make sure that the international forums have this on top of their agenda.
Mm. How do you both see the enforcement to be possible on a global area or a global level?
It's very tricky, and as Anne said, the simplest thing to do would, of course, be to ban any other fuel sold in the world. That would, easy. That's the only thing you can bunker. But as we do know, we do also accept clean technology, that you clean your fuel on the way out. And I think that's a good way for old ships, existing ships, to actually do comply. So I think we're also asking to have the possibility to have the dirty fuel, as we call it, on board. So it's not, but we don't believe it's actually our problem. The convention itself, Annex 6 of MARPOL, stipulates lots of things on the ship owners to do. And I think there's 5 or 6 regulations directed to the states. One of them, make sure you inspect, make sure you take legal penalty actions if you do not comply. And we have seen so far that there's a lot of focus being put on us, and very little, because I can say even for Swedish measures,
yes,
the legislation still is not in place.
No.
4.5 years after it's been introduced, it's still no legal implementation in place in Sweden. And I think that's a shame. So I think maybe it's even a trust issue now, that do we trust legislators? Because we know there are good ship owners and there are not so good ship owners. And we want to make sure that the good ship owners do comply and it will be effective. That's what we need to ensure our members, and that's the worry we have. Mm.
No, I agree. I think that we need to look at all possible measures in order to make sure that we can actually enforce this new regulation. And I think we also need to be honest with ourselves that if we don't, for example, go for relatively heavy sanction in terms of big fines if you're not compliant, then we will have people cheating on this. Probably not Swedish ship owners, probably not Danish ship owners, but around the world there will be somebody who will not be in compliance with the sulfur cap. So we need to have big fines. We need to make sure that we actually out those who are not in compliance in order to make sure that we get as good a global playing field as possible. So I think that is one of the things that we have learned also from the SECA area when we had the 0.1% sulfur cap in 2015, that if we don't address the fact that we need fines which are proportionate to what you can save if you're not in compliance, we will not, of course, win this battle. So this is another area where we need to do things which we usually don't like in this industry, but here we have to do it in order to make sure that we stay competitive.
Mm-hmm. You would not often hear me make compliments towards European legislation compared to IMO legislations, but there's actually one good thing they did with the sulfur legislation that came into force in Europe. What they do is that if you come here and you are not complying on the fuel, you are being registered for not being compliant, and you will be inspected more often. And if you have not been complying enough times, you will actually be banned from Europe. And I think that's also a very effective way of showing, because that's money, it costs money to have more inspections than others. And you're actually promoting the good guys. So I think, but that's possible because we are able to legislate even on these matters in Europe. But I think that's also a good example of how you can actually do it, that who wants to take these ships that do not comply? So I think we need to have the remote sensoring. We have sensors on the bridge here that you can see, the airplanes, there are traffic control. So I assuming that all the administrations are now seriously considering this in their budgets, in the legislation. I think that's probably why some of them are not even here, because they're home inventing things that will make this by 2020. What do you say?
No, I agree. We have to put in a lot of different measures, and I think this is an area where we have to work very closely with not only technology suppliers, but also with authorities in order to make sure that we get all these measurements in place. So there's a lot of job for us to do. I think one of the really positive things about the MEPC 71, the environmental meeting in the IMO in the autumn, in July, was that we actually for the first time got the IMO on track in terms of enforcement. And that is a new thing which I think we have to work with also in the future, so that when IMO puts in legislation, we also get the enforcement to follow. So I think that there's a lot of work for us to do with all the kind of people who are here at Donsø today, technology suppliers, ship owners, authorities, and so on, in order to make sure that we are ready in 2020.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned 2015, so that will say it has been 2 years now since the entering into force of the SECA. Which more experience can you use from SECA in regard to upcoming global SOx cap entering into force 1st of January 2020?
Well, I think I already mentioned some of them, and Pia mentioned some of them as well. I think we got some technologies in place because we learned that we need to have sensors, we need to have sniffers, we need to have a port state control where you're testing the oil or the fuel in the tanks. And I think we can draw on those experiences also on a global scale. I think we also, learned that we need to make sure that the sanctions are in place and that we have a global regime on that coming forward towards 2020. So I think we learned a lot from that. And then there's another thing which I think we sometimes forget. We also need to make sure that our seafarers, those who are out there on board the ships on the bridge or in the engine, that they also know exactly what is required of them, so that we don't get unnecessary events in port stage controls that we could avoid. And I think it's something that we, in Danish shipping and in Swedish shipping, will be working very hard on to make sure that ship owners are not by accident taken in a port state control when it could have been prevented. And I also think that we should look at making sure that if you, at least in the beginning of the sulfur regulation, if you by accident have a contaminated tank or something like that, that we also have to make way for that, so that we are not too harsh on people who are actually doing things by accident.
Yes.
And I think what we had also seen is that it's been strong powers here going. I mean, there are people selling these kinds of fuels. So, I mean, the lobby has been, tremendous on not having this regulation into force. So I think, the last point is the ship owner and the seafarer, and to say, like, if you're trying to do the right thing, we need to help them, because most, of course, hopefully, it's good that they are good people and they want to do well. So I think now that's the line we have been taking, internationally, like, get it in place as soon as possible, because you're going to need the time to prepare for the enforcement. So don't delay it, put it into force, because now they have a few years at least ahead of preparing, because it will take time, both legally but technically, and also for provider of this low sulfur fuel, also they need to start preparing.
Of course. You mentioned the thing with control and measuring, and what is your position on the executed fines?
And these are businesses, and it's run as businesses, and of course serious businesses and owners wouldn't like to get fined. It's not just the money, it's also the reputation, and that's why I pointed towards the EU, that you actually do sort of shame and blame, and I also think Anne mentioned that and it has to cost you also in the future, because the penalties we have seen, maybe I think the exception of US and Germany, has been very little. So if you don't also say this is going to be a cost in the future, more inspections or lost contracts, that's even the best solution. Or insurers, for example, have they even thought about how to look at this issue? when you insure a ship. So it has to be a ban for the future also.
I think I already mentioned that I think we need to have high fines which are proportionate to the savings that you can make as a ship owner if you're not in compliance. I can give you a few examples from Denmark. Danish authorities have caught 17 ships or ship owners who have not been in compliance in the SECA area. There has already been put forward 2 fines, and one fine was 370,000 Danish crowns, which is about, I think, 400,000 Swedish crowns, something like that. And the other one was only 30,000 crowns. So we have already seen fines which are bigger, maybe not big enough, but also smaller fines, depending on the how non-compliant, if you like, the ship owner has been. So we've seen fines, and I think we have to also go down that road in 2020.
Yeah, there is many things that has been done, but there is still things to be done. What is being done by the industry itself?
Well, I think a lot of things have been done by the industry itself. I think the industry is preparing for 2020. A number of ship owners have done, like the a number of the Danish ship owners, they have started developing a fleet of LNG ships. And LNG ships are bi-fuel compliant in 2020 when it comes to sulfur. A number of ship owners have already started installing scrubbers, not so much on ocean-going ships, but on short sea ships or ships who are in the short sea shipping business. And I think that ship owners are also looking to see whether there are other opportunities out there when it comes to different kind of fuels. So I think that ship owners are already preparing for not only for 2020, but also drawing some lessons from 2015.
Yes. Would you like to add something, Pia?
Just to add that what we need to sort of constantly remember, the legislators, is that these ships are being built now. The ships ordered now, delivered 1 or 2 years ahead, will last for 30 years. So the ships is coming now. We need to know exactly, tell us, CO2, I mean ballast water, tell us, we need to know, because these are actually being built as we speak, you know. So,
yes.
And I think that understanding is lacking. They think they can sort of drag on and drag on. It doesn't help us. Certainty does. Certainty and enforcement, fair competition, that helps us a lot.
Mm-hmm. You are both part of the board of International Chamber Shipping. What do Danish Shipping and Swedish Shipowners Association do to ensure the effective enforcement for the 2020 regulation?
I think actually the Northern European shipowner cluster, we work together because of course we do have SECA in here. North Sea and the Baltic Sea are SECA areas. So we have lots of experience, both on the enforcement side, but also how to comply. And we can actually, I think we share that, we can see among other ship owners from other nations that they are worried. And that's, I mean, it's fair. We were also worried. And so we can also tell them that, you know, we survived. We are still here, 2 years past SECA, and we're still around, most of us. And so we can also, so it's been a sort of also culture thing to sort of say, we need to do this, it's coming. And the only lesson we learned is the quicker we know the rules and regulations, the better. That's what we learned. Don't drag around, tell us, and we will comply. So I think we have had quite a debate, but it takes a while, you know, to see that it's not just bad things of legislation. It's sometimes we need to adapt to society, and society at large requires us to be more environmental friendly. So that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
I think not only working together with our Nordic colleagues like Swedish ship owners, we have done 2 things from Danish shipping. We have constantly put the question of enforcement on the agenda of ICS, the International Chamber of Shipping, in order to make sure that we have also made an impact in the IMO. So that is the first thing. The second thing we've done is we have tried to build alliances, because it's not enough for us in Europe to be aligned on this and to have good opinions on how we can enforce this. We need to build alliances globally, so that our Japanese colleagues, our Chinese colleagues, our Australian colleagues, and others in other places of the world are quite on the same page as we are, because otherwise we will never have a global level global playing field. So So building alliances is also something we have done.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to summarize this a bit, there is, you say there is much already done. IMO is on track. It's good with controls. It's good with high fines. You have to work in alliances and cooperate. And there is lots and lots of experiences. But there are still things to do. So, what is your wish for the implementation on 2020? To end with that.
I think flag states and port states need to alliance on this one, not just as Anne said in Europe, also with the ones that are ahead. Also US is already a SECA, and China is coming up as a SECA, because we need to sort of get this moving. It's only actually a few years ahead. And I think the earlier we get them to sort of start thinking about this, the better, and that's what we're trying to do. So the wish is that way ahead of 2020, they have a system in place that favor good guys and penalize the bad guys, and ahead of 2020, because we are going to be complying. 99.8% is going to be complying by 2020, and it's going to be costful. It's good for the environment, but it's going to have a cost for us. So better prepare, because we expect that to be in place.
I only have one dream, and that is that we have in place in 2020 a uniform, fair enforcement system that all port state controls around the world agree on and can actually enforce. So this is my sweet dreams.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Pia Berglund at the Swedish Shipowners Association and Anne Stephensen at Danish Shipping. Give them an applause. Thank you so much.